avons terminé ce tour d'horizon. Avant de remettre les prix des posters, donc nous avons l'honneur d'introduire une personne qui probablement n'a pas besoin d'être présentée parce que la plupart parmi nous, on les connaît au moins à travers ses dessins et ses comics. Donc il s'agit bien sûr de l'auteur de PhD Comics, Jorge Cham. Bienvenue Jorge, welcome, bienvenido. Jorge est né au Panama, il vit aux États-Unis. À part ses dessins, il a fait bien sûr une thèse en robotique à l'Université de Stanford et c'est là où il a commencé à dessiner. Depuis 2005, il donne cette conférence The Power of Procrastination. Voilà, il a créé aussi, après les dessins, la PhD TV et il a publié 4 livres. Après, il sera là à l'apéritif pour dédicacer son livre. Et pour l'heure, on va déjà apprendre un peu plus sur ce que nous savons très bien faire, nous tous et toutes, qui est la procrastination. Donc, merci beaucoup. Bienvenue.
Bonjour. Comment ça va? Ça va? That is all the French that I know. Oh, thank you. That was not very good applause. Although I do know a little bit extra here. I was required by law to also include the French. Well, thank you for, first of all, thank you to Melanie, Philip, Martine, and everyone who organized this event, for the PhD students, and for inviting me here today. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Yeah. And I want to thank all of you who came to this lecture. I know that it's 4 p.m., it's Tuesday afternoon. I'm sure at this hour, most of you would much rather be, you know, in the lab, working hard. But instead, you're here to procrastinate. Yeah. Right? At this hour, most of you are starting to do research, right? So. Well, how many of you here are PhD students? Raise your hand, PhD. Nice. Great. Do we have any professors here? Professors? How many are professors? All right. Thank you for raising your hand. Can you please step outside now? And I would ask about postdocs also, but I think they're used to being ignored. Who cares? No, thank you. So today I'm just going to talk to you guys about getting my PhD, what happened to me during my PhD career. And my story starts with, I was a PhD student at Stanford, as was mentioned before. And my research, my thesis focused on making these small robots that could run like cockroaches. Yeah. So here's a quick movie of what the robots look like. Yeah, so I like to show this. I like to show this movie for 2 reasons. First of all, I feel like this movie really kind of represents what getting a PhD feels like. Right, you know the feeling. You feel like you're running the whole time, but you're not going anywhere. Meanwhile, there's a more intelligent being stamping. But I also like to show this movie. It's very important. I like to show this movie because it's the only way that anyone will look at my research anymore. because it's been very clear that by far more popular than the research I spent years working on for my actual career, by far more popular has been what I was doing when I should have been doing research, when I was procrastinating, which was to make these comic strips called Piled Higher and Deeper, PhD comics. And so how it all started was that it was my first term in graduate school, and I opened the newspaper, the student newspaper, and there was an advertisement asking students to come up with ideas for comic strips. And I remember thinking at the time that, you know, there are a lot of stories about being a PhD student, being a young researcher, being a young scientist, a lot of stories that you really don't see anywhere else, you know, in popular culture, in TV shows, in movies, at least at the time, you know, there weren't a lot of these stories being told. And so I asked myself the question, who is this strange creature called the graduate student? And here I switched the capitalization just to annoy the biologist here. But yeah, I asked myself, what's going on inside of that complex and complicated psychology? And because, you know, most of the TV shows, the movies that you see, they're all about, you know, the cops, right? And the lawyers, all the dramas, they're always about doctors, right? I mean, the real doctors. The kind that help people. But yeah, I asked myself, what's going on inside that complex psychology and of the PhD student? And it turned out that apparently, apparently it's not that complicated. And I mean that in the sense that, you know, most of the PhD students that I knew weren't these kind of crazy, eccentric, weird, awkward stereotypes, you know, caricatures that you see portrayed in popular culture. You know, whenever a TV show tries to show a scientist or a researcher or just anyone who happens to be smart, they always resort to these weird kind of characters and these strange people. Big Bang Theory. Yeah. But you know, most of the PhD students that I knew when I went through it weren't these kind of weird type of people. They were all, you know, kind of regular people, you know. We were mostly just trying to survive the experience. And so that's what these comics became about. They became about surviving those one-on-one meetings with your professors, the begging that you have to do, back then I drew comics about being a teaching assistant. You know, and dealing with those annoying undergraduates. I hope there aren't any in the room here today. Yeah, surviving those late night project sessions. Learning about graduate student etiquette. Why you should never ask a PhD student, never ask him about their research. Let's see, those oral exams or thesis defenses or qualifying exams, good times. And then eventually other characters started to appear in the comics. For example, there was Cecilia, one of the brave 5 to 10% of women in some fields like physics or computer science or electrical engineering. We also had the token humanities graduate student, Tejo, who's always protesting something. And then, of course, we also had that guy that everybody kind of has in their department, right? That person that's been there longer than anyone can remember. Mike Slackernerney. I see some people in the room going, yeah, Mike, whose job it is to, as the old student, to educate the new students in the way of the PhD. So exactly, money and social life, a PhD student needs a shave, a PhD student needs not such things. Yeah. So that was actually said to me my first year by an older student called Mike. So I don't invent any of this stuff. This is all true to life, true to life. And then Mike, like many of us here, you probably find that you have to manage your professors and what they expect from you, but you also kind of find that you have to manage your significant others, your boyfriends, your girlfriend, your spouses. And so that's kind of what these comics were about. I just drew about these experiences that I was having, that my friends were having. And I found that people kind of liked these comics. They connected with the comics, not just because they could maybe identify with these stories or identify with the characters. I think people kind of related to the comics because the subtext of the comics, the underlying question, the underlying theme, was always about asking the big question about a PhD, the big question, which is, why? Why do you put up with all that, right? Why do you subject yourself to all of that suffering? Because, I'm pretty sure that nobody in this room is really here because of the money. So back then, a long time ago, I was very curious and I thought, well, I wonder how much they value PhD students, how much they get paid. And so I looked at this survey they did at the Chronicle of Higher Education where they looked at stipends for teaching assistants and research assistants over all these disciplines. And what you can do is you can take the average of this to get a figure equal to $14,055 US dollars as a kind of general idea, of how much they pay PhD students, at least in the US, per year. Which is, okay, it's not 14,055. It's not bad. I mean, you can probably survive on this, right? Maybe if you eat at McDonald's every day. But to compare this, to put it into perspective, let's compare this salary now to how much you would be earning. Let's compare it now to how much they would pay you if you worked at McDonald's. At least in California, how much they make a year. That figure turns out to be, should I stop here or should I? That figure turns out to be yes! Whew! $15 less. Yeah. I'm loving it. A few years ago, I was curious, and I thought, hey, I wonder what that figure is nowadays, more recently. And I looked it up, and nowadays it's more like 18,779, which is better, adjusting for inflation and all that. Until I compare that figure to how much the government will pay you in the US if you're unemployed. For your level of education, the US government will pay you that's right. It pays more to do nothing than it does to do whatever it is that you're doing right now. At least in the US. Yeah, so that was kind of weird to me at the time, and I thought, hey, I wonder, that didn't make a lot of sense to me. But what I did next was I took my procrastination to the next level. And I took all these comic strips that I would draw, and I would put them on a free website on the Stanford campus. And on the ones in the newspaper, I would put the web address in the bottom right corner. And so what happened was, without any kind of effort on my part, I think, what happened was that people who read it there would like it, and then they would tell their friends who were going to graduate school in other universities that they knew from undergrad. They were going to other schools, and then those people then tell their lab mates and their friends and their co-workers, and then those people then tell other people in other universities. And so slowly over the years, kind of like a virus, yeah, or a Tupperware party. These comics kind of went out into the world, and it was really interesting, to find out that these stories, these comics that I was writing about, weren't just limited to Stanford University. Oh no, apparently Apparently it's a global misery phenomenon. So that's a list of all the universities of the people who subscribed to the website up until a few years ago, just to kind of give you a sense of who's reading these comics. And it was also really interesting to find out it wasn't just limited to the sciences or engineering, which is where I was coming from. People from all kinds of disciplines were reading these comics. So this is a list of all those people's majors, just going from about A to about C. So I'm not going to scroll it, because some of these are kind of interesting to read. For example, you find out that grad students in art history are reading this, and brain and cognitive science, and what is this, Buddhist studies. I guess you can get a PhD in BS. Yeah, so that was really interesting, and all these people across the world and across all these different departments were reading these comics. And then what happened next was even more interesting. I started to get emails back from all of these people around the world, and I can roughly categorize the emails I get into these 4 types of reader emails. So the first type of email I usually get, I'll wake up in the morning, I check my email, and there's usually a message that says something like, "Oh God, I break down and cry, and there's a new comment. I don't know whether to laugh or cry." So that makes me feel good. Knowing that I'm making thousands of people out there weep. Yeah, you're welcome. But people also thank me. They say, "Jorge, thank you for writing these comics. Thank you for helping me goof off. I'm supposed to be working right now, but instead I just spend days surfing your website." And so that also makes me feel good. I'm pretty sure that somewhere in the world right now, there was probably a graduate student about to make an incredible discovery for humankind. Like, I don't know, they were in the lab and they were about to discover cold fusion or something, and they're about to do it, when suddenly their lab mate goes, "Hey, have you checked out this website?" And humankind took a step backwards. Yeah, thanks to me. You're welcome. But then I get a third type of email, and that email usually goes something like, "Cecilia, your character in the comics is so hot. Can I marry her?" And so this type of comment really disturbs me. Right? Because first of all, she's an imaginary cartoon character. And second of all, she's my imaginary girlfriend. So back off. Make up your own imaginary girlfriend. Or boyfriend, right? Or both. We are in Switzerland. I don't really know what that means. But yeah, back off. She's also the mother of my imaginary child. She's, okay, that went too far. But yeah, so yeah, and then I get a fourth type of email through the website. People usually go say something like, "Hey, you make me feel less alone. Your comic is probably responsible for keeping many of us sane." And so when I get this type of comment, I usually go, "Oh," it makes me think maybe, just maybe, this isn't just all a huge waste of time for humankind. It makes me think maybe, just maybe, it's more of a medium-sized waste of time. Because I read this survey they did once at the University of California at Berkeley, where they sent a questionnaire to all their grad students asking about their mental health. Yeah. I like how people assume something funny is going to come up here now. because I said grad students and mental health. But yeah, they sent this survey out to all the graduate students, and they got back the results. And what they found, first of all, that 95% of all graduate students at some point feel overwhelmed or overstressed about their PhDs, about their graduate careers, about their life. 95%, right? That's crazy, right? I mean, you're probably thinking, who are these other 5%? Why are they lying? Actually, I think I figured it out. I think these 5% are probably Buddhist studies. That would make sense. A little bit more serious, though, in this survey, they also found that 67% of them, so 2 out of every 3 graduate students, at some point feels hopeless or depressed about their graduate career, about their academic career. 2 out of every 3 graduate students. So this one is a little bit more serious. You know, it's not something we should take too lightly. You know, hopelessness and depression, they're not things that we should take too lightly. Which is why I am here today, to tell you guys that there is another way, there is an alternative to hopelessness and depression, and that is the way of procrastination. That's right, procrastination. You have this word here, right? Procrastinate. Oh, I was wondering, yeah. In Switzerland, you have this word? It's unthinkable in Switzerland. Yeah, procrastination, you know, putting things off until the last minute. Yeah, procrastination. So I know what you're thinking. That's a bad thing, right? Procrastination. You know, sex, drugs, procrastination. I tell my mother I don't do those things. But you know, I think procrastination just gets a bad reputation, gets a bad rap. And I think it gets a bad rap because I think people often confuse procrastination. They confuse it with its very close relative, its very close concept, which is laziness. But I argue that procrastination and laziness are not the same thing, right? I mean, laziness, that's when you don't want to do anything. Procrastination, you just don't want to do it now. I'll let you think about that for a minute. It's not the same thing, procrastination and laziness. And in fact, in the dictionary, all it says is that procrastination is to postpone or delay needlessly, which kind of sounds like a negative thing, right? But I think it actually gives us a loophole. Because if you can find the need for it, maybe it's not so bad. And in fact, there, I think, are a lot of examples throughout history where I think procrastination has worked out for the best. So here's a list of my famous procrastinators in history, going all the way back to Isaac Newton. Yes, Newton and the story of how the apple fell on him. I think the real question here is, what was he doing under that tree? Right? He certainly wasn't in the lab working, was he? Then there's the story of Albert Einstein. You know, I bet Einstein's mother would have loved for him to have worked very hard at the patent office, where he had his real job and made his way up to middle management, just like he was supposed to do for his actual career. But instead, Einstein spent a lot of time working on at the Swiss patent office. There you go. He spent a lot of time kind of on the side as a hobby working on physics equations, you know, which kind of worked out for Albert. Pretty good. I mean, relatively speaking. That's so bad. It's so bad it's good. Yeah, so what was I saying? Yes, it worked out for Albert in the end there. There's also the famous science fiction writer, Isaac Asimov. I don't know how many of you know Isaac Asimov, but he's a famous science fiction writer, and it took him 10 years to get his PhD in chemistry from Columbia University. Yeah, 10 years. Whoa. 10 years. Even the system was in shock. What? 10 years. 10 years to get his PhD in chemistry. Yeah, so that's a picture of Asimov before getting his PhD. Here's a picture of him after the PhD. Before, after. Yeah, and in fact, later on in his life, he wrote in his autobiography, in his memoirs, he wrote that when he was a graduate student, Asimov wrote that when he was a PhD student, his professor actually told him to his face that he was a bad writer, that he didn't know how to write well at all. And so despite that, he spent a lot of time working on, what turned out to be some of the most significant science fiction novels of the whole century. Now, a few more modern heroes of procrastination are the Yahoo and the Google guys. Yeah. So both companies here were, well, let's see, is there anyone in the room here today who does not use Yahoo or Google for your research? Yeah, so both companies were started by PhD students, and in fact, legend has it that Jerry Yang and David Filo's advisor just happened to go on sabbatical when one of them said to the other, hey, our professor's not here right now. Why don't we try to categorize the entire internet? Before our professor comes back. That is some legendary procrastination right there. Yeah, so so there's also, I think, real science behind procrastination. For example, there's a work by the cognitive psychologist Teresa Amabile, who found through experiments things she calls extrinsic motivators, so outside pressures. When someone's telling you that you have to do something, or you're supposed to do something because you should, or you have to, or you need to do it, it actually tends to make people feel more controlled, which actually tends to decrease their ability to think creatively. More recently is they looked at people using fMRI machines. They looked at people's brain activity while trying to solve problems that require insight. And so the hypothesis here is that when you're trying to come up with insightful solutions to kind of open-ended difficult problems, you're trying to put together concepts in your brain that are not already obviously connected to each other. And so for that, they hypothesize you actually need this kind of low-grade, almost unconscious brain activity, so that if you actually think about it too much or you focus on it too hard, you can actually suppress some of this important connection, long-distance connection making. Yes, that's right. I have references in my slides. With like et al. Look at that, et al. And everything. Yeah, there's all this history and all this science behind procrastination. Still, it has kind of a negative feeling about it, right? A negative stigma in society and especially in academia. So then I asked myself the question, why is that, What's really the problem with procrastination? And so I thought about this question for a long time. Perhaps too long. But I thought about this question for a long time, and then one day it occurred to me that maybe the answer to this question, maybe, just maybe, it might have something to do with this very typical conversation that I always find myself having with PhD students and academics, no matter where I go, anywhere in the world. And this conversation usually goes like this. You go up to a group of PhD students or academics, and you say to them, hey, how's it going? Comment ça va? And the response I usually always get, it goes something like, oh God, I'm so stressed, I'm trying to graduate, all these things I have to do, I've only been sleeping 3 hours a night. And so I go, whoa, that's crazy, that's insane, right? You're only sleeping 3 hours a night? I mean, man, I mean, that must mean that you're doing research 21 hours a day. And they usually respond, well, no, I went out and watched TV, and I'm organizing this event for the campus underwater basketball team of skirt, martial art, jazz, oboe. Pick your favorite obscure hobby you learn in graduate school. Club, because actually I am the club president. And so you go, oh. And then they go, but I should be doing research. I'm supposed to be working right now. And so I thought, you know, the real problem with procrastination is not that there aren't enough hours in the week, you know, to pursue all your hobbies and your interests and do all your work within that time period. It's not a question of time. It's really more a problem with guilt. I always get a nice uncomfortable silence here. Everyone's going, Right? Guilt, because the thing about being in academia and being a PhD student, being a professor, even a postdoc or a professor, the thing about academia is that it never ends, right? There's always, at any given time of day, at any day of the week, there's always something more you could be doing, right? Or should be doing. There's always something, more papers you could be, more references you could be reading, more papers you could be writing, more funding you could be applying for, more experiments you could be running, more data analysis you could be doing, more talks you could be giving, more equipment you could be fixing, right? Whereas I think maybe people with regular jobs, you know, 9-to-5 jobs, it's a little easier maybe for them to just leave everything at the office at the end of the day and then just go home and relax. In academia, right, there's this constant anxiety of always feeling that there's something else that you could be doing, you should be doing, that you're supposed to be doing right now. And yet you find yourself a lot of the time kind of doing other things, usually on the internet. And so then I asked myself the question, you know, why is that, you know? Because, you know, I feel like it's this constant anxiety, this constant struggle that maybe contributes to a lot of people, a lot of academics kind of burning out and stressing out a little bit early in their careers. And so then I asked myself the question, why is that, you know? Like, if you feel you have all these things that you're supposed to be doing, that you should be doing, that you could be doing, why can't we just do them? Why can't we just do the things we're supposed to do instead of doing other things, and then you feel guilty and depressed about them to the point where you don't even enjoy those things you used to enjoy before, right? Well, I thought about this question also for a long time. And I think in this case, the answer is a little bit simpler. Bear with me here. I think maybe, just maybe, the answer here might have something to do with the fact that we just don't want to do these things. You see, this is all related to my grand theory of procrastination, or as I like to call it, my unified theory of procrastination in academia. Which must be correct, because it has such an awesome acronym. But this theory of mine goes back to what I called in very early comics, some of the first comics, something that I called Newton's laws of graduation. So if you're familiar with these from the website or from the books, bear with me for a second here. But the first law of graduation says that a grad student in procrastination they tend to sustain procrastination unless an external force is applied to it. This is formalized more in the second law, which says that the HA of a doctoral or master's thesis process or anything in academia process is directly proportional to the flexibility F given by the advisor and inversely proportional to the student's motivation M, which we can write as an equation as H of the thesis equals the amount of flexibility divided by motivation, which we can abbreviate as A equals F over M, which we can rewrite as F equals MA. We all know you can't argue with F equals ma. I imagine a lot of you are humanities and social sciences. Perhaps this joke is a little out of your expertise here. But trust me, it's really funny. Yeah, but let's explore this equation in more detail. You know, how long it takes you to do something is the amount of flexibility you're given to do it divided by the amount of motivation you have to do it. And so for the PhD process, let's explore these terms a little bit in more detail. And let's start with this term down here, motivation. Because, you know, I think everyone starts their PhD. Well, let's face it, everyone comes to graduate school because it seemed better than getting a real job. But still, you get kind of excited about it, right? You come to graduate school with high expectations. You come here eager to learn, eager to make a difference in this world with your research. And so you take that next step in your life, and you're ready to turn that corner and face the challenges of graduate school. Except graduate school is more like maybe more like that. Or, you know, you're to plot this kind of what happens to the psychology of graduate students in the motivator meter. You usually see motivation start really high, but then quickly the first year, it all comes crashing down. And I think it all comes crashing down for a lot of people because for several reasons. First of all, you have to get used to being average. Right? Maybe in undergraduate, you were, you know, one of the better students, maybe one of the top students in your class, maybe, perhaps. But in graduate school, everybody was a top student. There's not a lot of room at the top. Also, you find out grad school makes you dumber. Right? You think you're pretty smart, right? Because you're fresh out of college and you know, the ratio, the difference between what you think you know and what you think you don't know is pretty high. So you feel good. But then you get to graduate school and you forgot most of what you learned. But you also realize how much you don't know, right? Because suddenly you're surrounded by all these really brilliant people and all these experts in their field, and so you feel dumber. And so then what happens to a lot of people is you kind of start to compare yourself. You know who I'm talking about here. That person in your lab or your group that just seems to work all the time, just writes all these papers, makes you want to. But don't do it. Trust me, it doesn't work out well. Yeah, so we end up, a lot of people end up comparing themselves to their coworkers, to their professors, to their advisor, and they end up feeling like an imposter. So it's actually a very well documented, very real thing in academia called imposter syndrome. Have you guys heard about that? Have they talked to you about that? Yeah, it's called imposter syndrome. It's kind of when you think that the only reason they let you into the PhD program was a clerical error. Somebody made a mistake somewhere. You know, you feel like you're not as smart as everybody else, that you're somehow fooling everyone, that you just don't belong. Still, you hang in there, and maybe you get excited about the research project that you picked for your thesis, right? Or the project that was picked for you for your thesis. But you get excited about it, right? Because it's kind of interesting and it's kind of cool. Then you find out it's impossible. And that somebody already did it. Maybe you get motivated about your qualifying exams or your PhD candidacy exam. I think you guys probably have something like this. But then you actually pass. And you can't even get out of bed anymore. Still you hang in there. You hang on to the motivation chart and you crawl your way up little by little. Until that one day, you know, that one day when you get that phone call, you know, that phone call from your friend. You know which friend, right? The one that didn't go to grad school. And you're talking to them on the phone and they're like, hey, yeah, we have this beautiful life now. I'm married. We just had a baby. A real baby. They're like, oh, we make all this money. We just bought a house. And you're like, what? You can buy houses? They drive a nice car. Meanwhile, you're on the other line, all by yourself, alone at night, still in the lab, eating ramen noodles. And before you know it, things start to look really scary for a lot of people, you know? At this point in the PhD, things look scary because, you know, I think this is when fear sets in. Fear, I think of a couple of things. First of all, fear of failure. You know, I think a lot of us who do make it this far do tend to be the kind of overachieving type, and so we have a lot invested in ourselves and in our accomplishments and what our awards and prizes and things like that. And so I think a lot of us have a hard time admitting to ourselves when it's time to keep moving on if something doesn't work out, you know? Of course, the problem is there's also fear of moving on. Right? Getting a PhD, it's kind of a comfortable situation, right? Relatively speaking. You can kind of walk into your lab at what? 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m. Yeah, a lot of people, I think, kind of hesitate here in their PhD program. They freak out a little bit because they're actually afraid of what will happen to them if they graduate, right? Because then if you graduate, you have to decide what you want to be when you grow up. You know, you're afraid of rejoining the real world out there, beyond the walls. It's kind of like what happens to people in prison. So a lot of people kind of freak out here and they end up procrastinating a lot. I've noticed this a lot. They freak out, they end up procrastinating, they find all these things, other things to do. And so my advice to you guys, to all of you here today is that, you know what, that procrastination, it's okay. It's okay because a very significant point for me in my PhD was to take a class from this professor called Bernie Roth. And Professor Bernie Roth is this world-famous, world-renowned authority and researcher and expert in the field of kinematics and robotics. Perhaps you've never heard of him. But Bernie Roth is also this kind of groovy 70s kind of dude, and so California. And so he would always ask his class, just like I'm going to ask you guys here right now, to tell me what are some of the things in life that you have to do. So let's start with that. What are some of the things in life that you have to do? What's that? Travel, you have to travel. I guess you have to move within space. Yeah. Sleep, you have to sleep, yeah. What else? Eat, sleep, yeah. Somebody said pay taxes, I think. Especially in Switzerland. Have fun, not in Switzerland. Yeah, that's what people usually say, like, oh, you have to sleep, you have to eat, you have to get a job, you have to pay your bills, you have to pay taxes, you have to graduate, you have to, yeah, but Bernie's point was that, you know, over the many years he was a professor, he would always listen to PhD students, and he would notice they would use language like that, like, oh man, I have to finish this paper, I have to finish this experiment, I have to graduate, I have to get a good faculty position. And so Bernie's point to us was that, you know what, in life, there's really nothing that you have to do. Basically, nobody's making you do any of these things. Not even to eat, not even to sleep, not even to travel. You know, everything you do, he would say, everything you do it because you want to do it. And so I thought, hey, that's really interesting. You know, if that's true, then I say that procrastination is what you do when you're doing what you want to be doing. Right? If everything you do it because you want to do it, then even procrastination has that kind of equal value, and so it's a good thing, right? Just ignore the logical fallacies here. Basically, the main message is to maybe just relax a little bit, enjoy it, and listen to your inner procrastinator. Yeah, procrastination. Now, I know what you're probably thinking right now. You're probably thinking, Jorge, all this procrastination stuff, that's great. But what if I never graduate? How does any of this help me get out of Lausanne? How does that help me get out of here? Well, fortunately, for all of us, for everyone, there are other terms in the equation. So as small as this term down here may get for you, inevitably the upper term up here will get even smaller. And here I would make a joke about L'Hopital's rule from calculus. Anyone? One person, all right. Yeah, basically what happens is that inevitably for all PhD students, and whatever you do in life, there is this other term in the equation, and so inevitably the final decision to graduate, the final impetus to finish, is essentially made for you. Inevitably, what happens is you run out of time, you run out of money, your significant others, has got a job somewhere else, or you're expecting a baby, or your family's expecting a baby, and so you have to just grab everything you've done. Because one of the things I notice about people with PhDs, if you ask anyone who's finished, even your professors, even the postdocs, if they were 100% happy with the final product they turned in at the end, most likely, I would bet, they'll tell you, not 100%. Most likely they'll tell you they ran out of time, they ran out of money, they had to find a job somewhere, they were expecting a baby, so they just grabbed everything they had done up to that point. Anything they could. Slapped it all together into this one document. Checked that all the margins were the right. Very important, guys. Check that out, and then just shoved it out the door, because the other thing that I noticed, if you look at people who are famous in your fields of research, like if you look at any of the world-famous, world-renowned experts in your fields, most likely I would bet, they're not famous for the work they did as graduate students, right? Most likely, I would bet they're famous for the work they did as professors. Which is kind of scary, right? But it's true, right? That makes sense, because when they were professors, they had grad students do the work for them. And so you realize all these things at some point, and you ramp up the motivation chart, and maybe you get to the point where you defend your thesis, right? Or at least write the outline for your thesis. But then it gets a little bit bumpy, which I don't have time to cover here today. I'll leave that for my future work. Future work. Yeah, so, but I will leave you with a few pieces of advice that I feel were helpful for me to realize. First of all, you kind of in graduate school, I feel like a lot of people, they form this image in their heads of their professors as these omnipotent beings, judging you and judging your every move and everything you say and do. And so I always like to tell graduate students that, you know what, your professor, well, probably doesn't think you're an idiot, right? I mean, because most likely he or she really don't really spend that much time thinking about you. And so I'll leave you guys here just to wrap up here with this list that I like to end my lectures with, because, you know, I feel like a lot of people, they see these comics, the comics that I draw, and they see this lecture that I give, and they assume that I have a very cynical view about academia and about getting your PhD, and so I almost always get asked the same question, like, hey, do you wish that you had not gone to graduate school, or do you wish you had quit graduate school early? But I always like to tell people that no, you know, I'm really glad that I went to get my PhD. I'm really glad that I stuck with it and was able to finish the degree, because I do feel like you learn a lot of very important things in graduate school. Very important transferable skills that will carry you not just beyond academia, but into whatever career you choose for yourself. So very important skills, starting with, first of all, you get pretty good at PowerPoint. Second most important skill I learned as a PhD student was how to write bullet item lists. But the most important thing I learned as an academic was how to give a 1-hour presentation on any topic. Even procrastination. Now, I joke around with this list, but I'm actually serious about it. I feel like when you get your PhD, you learn to teach yourself. You learn how to teach yourself anything technical that you need to learn for your research. You know, you become an independent learner. You also learn the ability to think analytically and be able to kind of break things down into its components. And you also learn the ability to keep in mind the big picture of things, you know, and then be able to communicate that to other people. Now everyone's really angry because he had a positive message at the end. So I'll let you guys, I'll leave you guys with the words of Mike Slackernerney. Mike, who said, grad school is a state of mind. Yeah, which state would that be? Preferably sleeping. You are interrupting, now go away. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Jorge. Is there any question in the room that
I have answered all of your questions in life. Done.
What about the new movie?
What about the new movie? Yes, there's going to be a new movie. So for those of you who know, there was an old movie. The comics got made into a movie with like not actors, but graduate students. You can watch that movie. It's really good. I liked it. It's called the PhD movie. Just Google PhD movie, and you can watch it online. But we're making another one, which starts filming in like 3 weeks. So yeah, so if you were a Kickstarter backer for that, if you helped us raise the money through Kickstarter, you'll get some updates about that. But yeah, hopefully they'll screen it here next year. Thank you for asking.
Thank you very much. That was terrifically interesting. And I'm wondering, in all of your journeys throughout the world, if you find that the PhD experience differs depending on how a culture is set up a PhD. So in this country, PhD students are paid extremely well.
Yes.
They have a finite period of time to do it in, and they're treated like employees.
Right. Are you a professor? Are you?
Yes, I am.
So let me get this, what you're saying is, why are they complaining? They have nothing to complain about here.
Those are your words, not mine.
Yeah, you know, that is, what was the question? Are there any differences? Have I seen any differences? Yeah, you know, I just draw these comics, and somehow wherever I go, PhD students show up to, they read them. And
They're undoubtedly funny, but in all seriousness, as an American living here, I survived the American system as you did. And there's a very cushy life here.
A very what?
Cushy.
Cushy, okay.
And I was wondering if you've noticed this, since you probably have a larger field of view than I do.
Yeah, you know, I think that, well, there's still sort of there's two aspects to that question. One, are there cultural differences, right? And two, like, does getting paid a lot make a difference? Is kind of what you're asking, right? Yeah. Well, I don't know. You guys seem very happy, so maybe it does make a difference. Yeah.
But the question is that we work at the same wage, right?
They're also paid well.
Yeah, but I mean,
I mean, compared to the United States.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I mean, I think in most cases, you know, sort of the core of the comics, the core anxiety, the core humor is not related to how much you're getting paid or how much you're not getting paid. I think most of the anxiety just comes from being at that point in your life where you're like 20-something years old, you're approaching your late 20s, you have no idea what you want to do with your life. You know, you're stuck in a project in which you're not quite sure what the answer is. You know, it's an open problem that nobody's done before. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of kind of anxiety. And so I think that's kind of where the core anxiety of the comics, and I think that's common no matter where you go anywhere in the world, you know, right? Like, you guys may be getting paid well, but you probably have your parents asking like, hey, how long are you going to be in school? Right? And when are you going to start a family? So I think that's part of mostly where the anxiety comes from. And whether there are cultural differences, you know, I was like I've been to like universities in like Israel, Saudi Arabia, Asia, and all that, and most of the time, like if I'm going out with, hanging out with graduate students there, like nobody's from the place where I'm at, in a way, right? Like almost everybody is from somewhere else, and so I think academia is kind of its own little country where, you know, there's, I mean, there are some details like that are different, but I think the basic dynamic between professors and students, it's all sort of comically the same everywhere.
You can feel, you know, more happy about it. But the overwhelm, I think it's the same, like for all PhD. Anywhere you are.
Oh, good, good. So we just have to pay people more, and then I'll be out of a job. Thank you.
I'm a professor. No, but I think, just to answer your question, I think it's even worse, the feeling to be paid to do procrastination in our country. So the anxiety level increases.
Yeah, thanks. Yep.
How is your life now?
How's my life now? You mean like, how's my research going? Thank you for asking. How's your research going? No, my life is great now. You guys shouldn't feel bad for me. I mean, after I graduated, what did I do? I taught at Caltech for a few years. I was like an adjunct professor, and then I started doing these comics full time. And so it's been a few years now. I just draw comics for my job. Yeah. I know, it's impressive, right? PhD, Stanford. Comics.
I think we can thank once again Jorge Cham.
Thank you very much indeed.
Oh, thank you, Philippe.
It is great. Have some chocolate.
Oh.
I hope this will be easier than the raclette yesterday. No.
No, that was delicious. Thank you.
So thank you very much again. Well, I think we have just, on a juste une petite 3 minutes de remise de prix des posters. So we're going to have poster prize. Et puis ensuite, then you're going to be outside for the aperitif and sign. Maybe people want to talk to you more, I think.
Sure. Free food.
And there are some, you brought some comics?
Yeah, there's. So I brought some books. So if you want to buy some books.
Okay, expensive. So you put your money. Okay, thank you very much again. Bye. Lorraine?